Greetings. It's Jerry White, the Executive Director of URI, and we are here to prepare the homework and the review for the GC meeting on Thursday, December 12th. So please, by all means, grab a cup of coffee or tea or beverage of choice as we dive into a lot of material and discuss a lot of changes that are underfoot as we plan for the launch of our 2025 new strategy leading to 2030, and thank and appreciate all the people who have contributed to this, including all of you. So please bear with me as I pull up the slides and walk you through what's in store for 2025 and seeking approval for the 2025 budget. All righty. There we go. I hope you can read this okay. Yes, we're going to go through some program highlights for the coming year and also the budget presentation. So I'm excited to share all that's going on. There's been a lot of change. People joke with me that no one likes change but a wet baby needing a diaper. But in fact, change is all around us, outside of URI and inside URI. So it's the natural thing to adjust and adapt to evolution. And we're very excited about 2025 because we feel like we're getting ready to launch a lean, mean URI that will actually help people for years to come. So here we go. First of all, as we start out, just to frame and us squarely into the strategic framework, we're very excited after the 6 to 7 months of co-learning and co-creation and inputs from all of you. We have developed a framework that's not perfect, and we're still working on streamlining it and learning to communicate and consolidate it. But the regional work plans this year were done with an eye to the framework and our 3 priority areas: network growth and vitality. We can grow to many more countries and increase the number of CCs in those countries, as well as the quality and the vitality of our CCs and our network. Also building our capacity and connection for learning and action. So URI will hopefully become the go-to network for interfaith learning in action. And we're going to train a new generation of interfaith leaders. We have a strong focus on youth and intergenerational work to make our change-making initiatives come alive and attract new funding. And you've learned about the new app. I think the team sent out some video earlier this month to show off the URI Connect app that will be tech-assisted support for our connectivity. And then lastly, front and center is violence prevention and eco-healing. This is such an important part of URI's mission to end religiously motivated violence. And so these 3 pillars, or 3 legs of a stool, or the 3-layer cake for URI, whatever your metaphor, it's exciting for us to jump in and start the new year with strong focus and a strategic compass. So I'm going to cover a little bit of the highlights and then some of the regional spotlights of things that people are planning up in each region. Right now, we know that we've approved the face-to-face meeting to be held in Mexico in 2025. So that's reflected in the budget. So thanks to the Latin American and Caribbean team and the RLT, as well as the indigenous representatives and partners, we're going to host and guide the 2025 face-to-face in Mexico. And this is an opportunity for us to sort of finalize and ratify the strategic framework and review all the regional plans for the coming 5 years, starting with 2025. So it's going to be in the Yucatan Peninsula. We're currently looking for the available retreat center or less touristy hotel venue that we can find, but we're confident it will work out well. The dates to put in your calendar, of course, are that not everyone will arrive early, but the indigenous network of representatives will gather and prepare the way from April 21st to the 24th. And they'll overlap with the arrival of all the trustees, the global staff, and even some representatives from the Senior Advisory Council, we hope. And that'll be April 22nd to 23rd as arrival dates. On the 24th in the afternoon is when we begin, followed by a dinner reception for all the participants gathered. And then from April 25th to the 30th, we will have the gathering with creative training, GC meetings, committee gatherings, and learning from each other how to do integrated work. So we're really excited to announce this and look forward to it in 2025. Another thing that's exciting is that as we targeted growth, I just wanted to see an overview of the years of the CC growth, um, and how it has trended. So as we start to see, during COVID, it went down. There was a peak in 2015, and exactly when 88 CCs were created in 2015, and we ask ourselves why, it was because Victor and the senior team intentionalized it, said it's time to grow, to redouble our efforts to plant CCs around the world. Um, and so then we had quite the dip, of course, with COVID and the pandemic that sort of put a freeze on things. When I arrived in 2022, we reset as a goal to grow, hopefully more than 20% as we've projected in our strategic framework. So we're hoping that this year, by 2024, we'll have 61 new CCs, and then projected for 2025, let's exceed all of the precedents of previous years and get up to 90 CCs. So that's a goal for all of us to grow our numbers. It's also exciting because our Porticus grant and our review of all the CCs showed that interfaith work really matters, and that URI's approach to interfaith work with the formula of the CCs, with 3 different faiths and 7 different people gathering together to work in their backyard or across borders on common action and interfaith cooperation, that it makes a real difference. So growth is good in quality and quantity. 2025, here we come. We also think we've been able to grow much more the individual members. That was met with some skepticism by the regions over there early on, but in fact, it started small, and thanks to the wonderful funding of Jill Kramer and others and the advice of the SAC, we wanted to make an opportunity for individual members to be part of the network, to grow. That's all of us, the staff, the CCs, our advisors, our partners. The more, the merrier. So we're seeing extensive growth thanks to Layla and Maria looking over membership, but now looking at it as a communications outreach plan. We think by 2025, we could have over 3,000 members. We've grown already from when I arrived about 500 to 600 to 1,600. And with more and more people learning about URI and increased communication and visibility and a marketing plan, we believe we can blow it out of the water. And these individual members will really find opportunities to participate in our learning ecosystem and create CCs in their own backyards. So when it comes to violence prevention, as we look at 2025 highlights, thank you, Karen Volker and Larissa, for pulling these together. They're very specific challenges we're facing to regionalize the work and sustain and scale violence prevention and the health approach. So we're going to be training 25 trainers across 3 regions, and also CCs to start to mentor and train others in their backyard, in their regions. And we're also looking to fund and hire at least 1 full-time or part-time violence prevention regional staff person. So this is part of our regionalization trend, creating hubs for capacity building, and that each region will have its own strength. The violence prevention team, all of us are planning to launch Indigenous-led violence prevention programs as well, and support the implementation of new pilot projects that specifically focus on the health approach to violence prevention. And all the while, we're more mindful than ever of raising new funding just for this category of work and across the board in each and every region. And our pilot programs, I think, will be very compelling and exciting for funders. When it comes to the learning and action ecosystem, the 2025 highlights include ongoing growth. You saw a recent report from Ruben Shank and the team. This is exciting. We have each region completing and sharing their insights, much more cross-fertilization, sharing the learning and insights across the borders and across our whole global network. And we expect to have a 20% increase in new participants with a strong focus on youth in our work, and we'll be able to measure that quarter by quarter through December 2025. And also looking that these regional collaboration action hubs would be places where different cohorts of CCs and individual members, region by region, can actually start to work on pilot projects for their collective efforts and collective impact. So the learning and action system is up and running. We aren't there completing all of our modules, but what we have accomplished in the last year is unprecedented in the history of URI. So as we look at 2025 too, one of the side platforms that we developed with Noon and the help of Ronaldo Pamponnet and his team, um, Ruben in the crowd, as you've just seen and maybe been invited to join, that we're looking to actually have 40% of the most active URI members and 50% of the youth joining to contribute at least twice a month. And we're looking to measure this in terms of the vitality of our online communities. So we'll have increased participation and also be assessing our impact and the utility of the Connect app in the coming year. Looking forward to finally having pro social media or something beyond WhatsApp or the webinars to actually connect us across the world. So congratulations on a new milestone of technology at URI. In terms of development and outreach, we had the three areas, of course, so we say the three-layered cake in our strategy development of our framework, but we need the frosting, which is the communication strategy, including fundraising, development, and outreach. So in talking with Diana and the teams in this space, we're looking at really doubling up or redoubling our efforts. So we'll have a new fundraising committee communication strategy developed in early 2025. We're starting on that now and not waiting. And one of the goals is the retention and growth of our funders in the Bay Area. So many of the friends of Bill Swing and the hundreds of others that when it was started in the San Francisco area, that's where the vast majority of our funders come from. Well, we want to expand our outreach to other markets, not knowing, that where we can go across the world, but starting with New York and LA in the United States, for example, in the region surrounding. That's where we have some good connections. I've been working very closely with Karen Volker on institutional donor outreach, which is a fancy word for foundations. So we have new proposals and inquiries into 8 to 10 foundations where it looks like we may qualify for grants. We aren't taking it for granted that we get this money, but even with a 10 to 20% return on this effort, we expect to see six-figure growth and multi-year commitments to URI going forward. In addition to this, because of our many generous donors who want to sustain us, we're looking for planned giving. And that's a phrase we use in the United States about, bequests or putting URI in your will as a tax-deductible donation. So this is how we developed an endowment at URI. And so we are going to be working with Bernstein.com pro bono. They've offered their services to help us to secure and develop the pitch for 2 to 3 or more longer-term donors who are leaving their legacy to sustain URI for the coming decades. In addition, I also mentioned the individual membership program, but part of that, as we grow in our numbers and get over 250,000 individual members over time, then that's when the sort of tipping point happens to have some of them, a proportion, maybe a small proportion, but a very important proportion of small monthly donors, repeat donors. So we will develop a grassroots giving plan and be looking for individual membership to grow and help fuel that. And lastly, and really importantly, the new committee, fundraising circle, is being nested at the Senior Advisory Council, the SAC, and that is up and running right now under the leadership of Bob Coleman, and we'll be looking for new leadership and new members of people who are very confident and wanting to reach out to their networks to mobilize resources for URI and resume our growth. So these are some of the ideas we have for the different regions. I don't want to dwell on all of them. These are sent from the regions and from the planning committees, looking at the circles of work in Africa, for example. So I'm not going to go through each. I'll just go through the slides. You can read them. You'll be able to see them attached and go through them at your leisure. I think it's interesting to note that each region has a different flavor, a different priority. There's a lot of similarities, but in terms of like the ambition or the confidence to grow or to introduce new methods, there's a difference. And it's worth noting as we get to know each of our regions in our approach to regionalization. So here in Africa, it's exciting to see their ambition to actually organize quarterly, regionally specific violence prevention trainings that will have at least 20 CCs per workshop. So that would be exciting for 2025, as well as holding other meetings to build the relationships with a geographic focus on increasing growth in Botswana, Namibia, and Zambia. It doesn't mean that's the only focus. It just means one of the focus of the group in Africa in the coming year. One second. Also in Africa, Muse, as our ambassador to the AU, the African Union, is going to be doing outreach to 55 African countries through ECOSOC and the AU partnership, and then using World Interfaith Harmony Week, as we do all around the world, but to organize international partners Africa-wide and include advocacy for the rights of indigenous communities. So another initiative for eco-healing is to make sure that initiatives for the green cities, or what's called the so-called green rule, like the golden rule, but loving the planet, we can do in partnership with UNEP and Faith for Earth initiative in the coming year. So lots of good ideas for partnerships arising in each of the regions. In South Asia, our largest and sort of flagship, with India having the most CCs, they're looking to start to actually fundraise more and revive the India Trust with a new board, and to motivate them in their growth, and to do a series of violence prevention workshops that extend beyond India to Bangladesh and Pakistan, for example, as well as continue the cross-zonal CC exchanges and programs we have throughout India. With new staff now, fully staffed for South Asia, we're excited to see the growth that will come. When it comes to Europe, we also see a strong emphasis on youth outreach, partnering with the CCs and agencies to organize a 5-day interfaith youth camp for 20 young people, and expecting at least one new youth-led CC to be formed. From my point of view, I'd love to encourage the European network to be more ambitious and to grow and set higher marks, not to be competitive, but to see, like, in this vast and beautiful network called Europe, surely there's more growth that we could expect than beyond youth, but also with the other types of CCs and even university outreach we could do across the continent. So also glad that Europe is increasing its attention to violence prevention, led by some new CCs and work in the United Kingdom following our visit last March in 2024. So when it comes to Latin America and the Caribbean, they have their hands full, of course, with the face-to-face meeting and how to leverage the Mexico gathering to grow awareness of URI and build new partnerships. And they have an ambitious plan for youth outreach and training programs, growing on the great work of Inouye and the team this year in Colombia, for example, and also growing on the Central America outreach, where we introduced new CCs in Honduras and had a historic partnership among indigenous people from the region. We're expecting to grow that and introduce more violence prevention trainings to 150 new participants. And overall, looking at our own understanding across the network, regardless of what country you're in, to understand indigenous cosmovision and the practices of circles and listening and honoring and caring for Mother Earth. So this is a very important part of our original DNA, indigenous outreach and partnership. So when it comes to Middle East and North Africa, Mamoun and the team are on it already, very confidently pulling together regional assemblies for interfaith dialogue, and have some new ideas for peace-building materials and training to distribute in Arabic and across the region. And also an interfaith focus to come up with, we may call them hubs, but MENA interfaith hives, to look at how to increase the region's focus on all interfaith activities. And gosh, we know we need it more than ever. It's a region in crisis with a lot of violence. And so the courage and the stamina of the teams across the Middle East and our CCs is really heroic in these days. And we commend them and pray for their success and growth. When it comes to the multi-region, that's, as you know, across many borders, and largely CCs that tend to be more mature with an online presence. So doing an outreach campaign with a methodology to attract and onboard new CCs is what is going to be done by the multi-region team, launching social media campaigns during World Interfaith Harmony Week as well in February, as well as trying out and testing a Golden Rule Day campaign against violence. So this is an exciting part of the multi-region planning that they've put forth this month, and we commend their growth and ambition as well. When it comes to North America, there's been a bit of a pause because with Tahill's departure this summer in July and the budget crisis, we put a stall on the hiring of a regional coordination staffer or coordinator. And so that will happen in the first quarter of the coming year, where we'll be able to resume our work plan development for 2025 in alignment with the strategy priorities. But some of the good ideas that were already germinating was how do we outreach and learn from the San Francisco Interfaith Councils and reach out to mayors and governors across the country where there are other interfaith councils who've never heard of URI and could be part of our membership, and also to start to penetrate and reach out to universities and youth during these times to create CCs and join as individuals. So there's a lot of activity to be planned for North America, and we'll hopefully meet our new regional coordinator during the Mexico meeting in April. So when it comes to Southeast Asia and Pacific, we're also seeing a lot of change. I was there in May with Maria and Sheetal and the trustees, the RLT, all gathering. So we could start to think about new ways of approaching Southeast Asia through circles and what we're calling sort of country liaisons, not necessarily officers, but maybe part-time youth representatives for URI or youth ambassadors who are able to tap into the appetite to address violence prevention in certain hotspots in the region. So there was agreement to focus growing out of Jakarta or Indonesia, growing with Vincent and Angie's participation to get Malaysia and the other islands. Of course, the Philippines is quite strong. We want to continue that growth as well as redouble our efforts in Australia and elsewhere. So this is new for CPAC to make it come up to speed, and we're looking to grow individual members as well as CCs across the region. All right, that was just the sort of program highlights so you get a sense of us being purpose-driven, of course, and mission-driven. So we don't do budgets for the fun of it or have offices or networks just for the fun of it or org charts. It's for the mission, our purpose. So we're very excited to be able to work on a budget to support that and grateful to all of our donors and the efforts of the teams to mobilize resources to sustain us. So just a quick comment here. You know that this past year was super difficult. At the last GC meeting, I was reporting on need to make $1 million cuts in the budget, as well as asking the URI Foundation for loans to cover the costs when we realized we were down from significant 6- and 7-figure donors who had given in the past and were no longer willing to give or were not ready to resume their giving. So we were instructed by or I should say guided wisely by the executive committee and all of you to develop a budget that was in the closer to, instead of the $4 million growth budget that we had been pushing for, and we were aspirational to continue, but actually to be safe and conservative and have a working budget at about $3 million. And then including the face-to-face, that's another 280,000. So about a $3.3 million budget total for 2025. So I'm going to take you through some of the numbers and our process. So thanks to David Stearman as our interim chair and treasurer, chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, we set out a timeline to present our first drafts following the guidance and modifications and review of the Executive Committee and the Budget Committee. And we started that work in October as per usual. In November, we had a second draft to be presented to the Budget and Finance Committee. And then by late November, we had a final draft budget presented that was passed out of the Budget and Finance Committee to be recommended to the Executive Committee this month. And so with that review, we are now going over the budget that we've prepared for the Global Council presentation. You had in your advanced packages with the agenda, the cash flow expectations for the end of the year, as well as the 2025 draft global budget. So this is my recording and circulating some more details so you can come prepared to the meeting and I don't have to spend as much time there. So the budget will be submitted for a vote of approval as per last year and the year before, hoping, as we've had in the past, a unanimous approval so we can hit the ground running in January 2025. So you don't just do a budget and make $1 million cut without having some principles and some guidelines. So we discussed how we were going to proceed in making the judicious and wise cuts and difficult cuts, I must say. And so, first of all, the obvious, we are mission driven and purpose centered. So our work always has to be in alignment with the PPPs and peace, justice, and healing. A second part of our principle was stabilization. We've been through so much change, and with the disruption of financial support, we wanted to make sure that even as some staff were moving on in the coming year, that these would be phased staff transition with an eye to succession planning. And so we call that the principle of stabilization of URI in 2025. We also had our strategic compass to work from. So with multi-stakeholder framing over the last 6 to 9 months, it meant that those priorities, the 3 main work areas, we don't cut them off and just chop off one and keep another. We don't amputate them from each other. All 3 are interdependent, and they were designed to be inextricably linked. So we're coming to understand that, and we wanted to make sure that we were adhering to the good work that had been done over the past several months. Another principle was regionalization. We are going to be working with integrated teams. That's how we work best, with our RLTs and partners and staff and trustees and people who advise us. And the regionalization would shift more empowerment and accountability, including for fundraising and planning, among other things, to the regions, because each region is different. Of course, their context is different, their politics, their current situation, and what they're struggling with. So each, as you saw, has their own flavor and priorities for the coming year, and even interpretations of our strategic compass and framework. Then we wanted to be Indigenous aligned. We had learned in the last year, but also since our founding, that unless we maintain sort of a principle of intergenerational culture and work and a focus on earth healing, that we wouldn't be true to our core mission and charter. So in the Indigenous communities and representatives have called to host our face-to-face meeting in Mexico, and that's also part of this alignment. Then, of course, learning in action. We adapt and learn, part of our principles. And so with the new app and the great work of Ruben Shank and the team and all of you, we are going to have amplified and tech-assisted storytelling at the regional and local levels, as well as social media strategies. And we wanted to make sure there was resources for that. And then resourcefulness means we are diversifying and targeting new fundraising for each region, but also new foundations, as I mentioned, and new individual donors as well across the board. So resourcefulness and resilience, these are hallmarks of URI and our budget transition development for 2025. So let's look at the comparisons here, just so you get a sense. There's the 2023 actuals. So we had total revenue of 4.2 million plus in 2023, 4.4 million plus in this year, but that's actually a little bit of a cheater number because that includes the loans we had to take from the foundation. So in fact, that's closer to 3.4 million. And then closer to the 2025 budget projections is raising about $3.6 million of revenue in the coming year. So that's healthy. That's a healthy budget and a core budget for URI. And our expenses, by comparison, was a $4 million actual budget audited for 2023, and then a $4 million projected budget by the end of this year, again with a propped up revenue from the foundation. And then so the budget for the coming year, as per the guidance of the Global Council and the EC, was for 3.280. So that's what we'll be going over, and you had in your packets for the meeting on December 12th. So in each case, we should end with a surplus, end the year with a surplus, and with an eye towards repaying the URI Foundation loans, starting with the $300,000 we needed for the cash flow emergency in June and July. So that will be paid back, inshallah, at the end of this year, leaving us with $120,000 to move forward So as you look at your cash flow analysis of the 12 months of 2024, you can see the rate of spending, the holding back and restraint to get to that amount saved so we could start to pay back the loans and start the year healthy. So all these budget changes invariably or necessitated staff changes and to make some ones that we want to honor. For example, Pamela Banks will be moving on and leaving. Right now, she's on medical leave for about a month to 6 weeks, but she'll be leaving URI on January 31st after more than 14 years of devotion and dedicated service to URI and many years of clean audits, she would add. So we are truly grateful. And that's something we want to note in terms of changes in the finance department. So the finance and admin department, after the crisis this summer, we had Bob Coleman and Barbara Shannon and others in the EC create a team to start to look at what do we really need going forward and what are some of the areas that we can strengthen. Luckily, we've had Pamela partnered with Robin Neither-Gold, who was a contract hire to work with Pamela during Ida's maternity leave and extended leave in the past year. So Ida has returned to us this October, hallelujah. But Robin will be moving on with Pamela at the end of January. And so additional changes needed for 2025 would be hiring a part-time contractor or experimenting with a fractional CFO. So someone who'd be a chief financial officer, but part-time. It might be that it's 25 hours per month to be determined. And we're starting to recruit and interview candidates for that. We also need to hire an accounting associate that will be in the San Francisco area. Gisela ended up moving on October 31st. So we're recruiting her replacement to start mid-January. And also the good news is reducing office space. Our roommates, Pachamama, whom we love, want to take over our rent. There's plenty of room. And because of the changes of staff, we need less space. But we do need a pied-à-terre, so to speak. We need an office and an address. And for the continuity of URI, we'll move from 4 offices now down to 1 as Pachamama takes over our offices and our lease. And we want to thank Biff for helping to negotiate these great deals with the Tides Foundation, but also Pachamama, our partners. All right, so now let's get into the detail of revenue. I know that Diana can't be on the call on Thursday, but we wanted to look at the numbers. And you can see the actuals of $4.2 million raised in 2023, the projected for 4.4 in 2024, again with the URIF loan, you can see at the bottom of $1 million plus. So as we're looking at 2025, the guideline was to be pretty conservative, really conservative. And we're starting the year stronger than probably ever with the cautionary tales of the last year causing us to add up everything in blue. So over $2 million has already been secured and has been promised and documented to start our year. So we have, starting at the bottom, luckily in the foundation, there's the George Shultz Fund, which was set aside to generate revenue for our face-to-face and global council gatherings. So there's $280,000 for that. We have the ongoing income from our endowments and the URI Foundation and their investments at about 5%. So that $538,000 is specific and secured. We have reimbursement from the foundation for the financial support and work we do for the audit, among other things. And then we have the Bob and Connie Lurie grant for $500,000. This will be the second grant of a 3-year promise of $500,000 per year. So that is secured as well. And then we have the foundation grant from Sarowitz. There's been a challenge on the timing for this year that it looks like the $100,000 this fall will be paid in the coming year. But the good news is I think we'll be up to $250,000 in that renewal. I don't want to jinx it, but it looks like we will have more money as per the good work that we did in the first year for $100,000. And that should mean, using $100,000 and then $150,000 extra going into the coming year. For moving up the list, the revenue from the Kramer grant is already secured. This also is a second year of $500,000 for making our donation from Jill Kramer, 3-year commitment she had made. And then there's the renewal from previous 6 to 7-figure donors, our beloved long-term friends of URI and Bill Swing, where about $200,000 to $300,000 of that is already raised or committed, and it's above another like 100 of the top 300,000 already committed. So we're looking at about $1 million, or of which we'll have some to start with. And so you're looking at about $850,000 in terms of our projections, which is pretty normal for our yearly annual fundraising. So we feel like has some stretch in it that includes between the 850,000 and the 300,000 right underneath it, includes what I mentioned as our foundation outreach, growing beyond our initial grant with Sarowitz and our former grant with Porticus, and having some of those, at least 2 to 3 of those grants come in while we look at new major donor opportunities in California and also on the East Coast. So that's the revenue picture. I hope I did Diana some justice here for all her good work on the team. It's a small department, and Diana and Bill and myself are on these numbers every day, and trying to retain and grow our support. So the total number, as you saw in the budget already, would be up to $3.598 million to work with as revenue for 2025. When it comes to expenses, the document we sent for the budget in your packets that you can print out or follow along online was more detailed, but we want to make a couple comments on what we were trying to do and the guidance from the executive committee and you all. One was to retain our overall support regionally, so to keep steady our growth or retention of the numbers. So in fact, we have the $372,000 for the regional support and the staff contractors around the world. We have the stipends for regional coordinators and staff at the $275,000, a little lower in part because of Tahill, the delay in Tahill, as well as some other hires. In some ways, we're saving some money, and then also the program grants at $313,000. So there was some, really looking at our projected numbers and having to come up with a little bit of rationale and some reduction, but holding steady for our regional expenses. I know some people, the small number for regional support for the youth leadership program or fellowship that was done right now, we have more of an approach that, in engaging youth leaders all around the world from universities, it's not just to pick out a few to sponsor for some activities, it's actually to have a strategy of youth engagement throughout the network and across our countries. So that's why that is zeroed out, although we have more investment in youth across the board. So when it comes to the staff gathering and the face-to-face, we already mentioned that in pale blue highlighted here, 280,000. The workshops and the trainings are for violence prevention. That 75,000 is largely for the growth of Latin America and the Sarowitz earmark for Central America and growing in the region with Indigenous partnership. And the professional services, I'll show you shortly the breakdown of that number for $364,000 on the next slide. And for travel, this is much less because you may recall in the first couple of years when I've been the new ED, we went around the world and had whole teams. So it was like Preeta, our former chair, plus the senior team I was getting to know, plus the RLTs hosting global travel. So it took sort of almost 2 years to get, the tour de force around the globe. So in the coming year, it's not expected for that much travel needed. There's an allowance for 35,000. But if you look, a lot of travel will be our gathering in Mexico. That's contained in the global staff gathering above. So the travel related to Mexico is displaced and included in the 280,000. When it comes to insurance, it gets a little more boring. That's insurance for travel and for offices and for other things. So that's 20,000. Translation and expenses, 9,000. We think with AI and other things, we could probably, and maybe some volunteer support, get those numbers down as well. But we don't want to chintz on translation. Make sure that even my fast talking English is translated for all of you adequately. And then for the coming year, we've decided, because of the lessons learned of Circles of Light, of these big gatherings in the Bay Area, that they aren't as successful. So we're going to take a break from Circles of Light in 2025 and regroup and analyze the type of gatherings and major donor fundraising and fundraising we might do in the future in San Francisco, but other cities as well. And that could include regional cities in your backyard. And then contingency and unpaid liabilities. That is, again, rather boring, but has to do with payout of some tax bills from this year spreading to next, as well as some retirement plan substitutions and obligations that we had carried over for the coming year. So by now you're really on your third cup of coffee, but you'll go down to the smaller number again. Seeing that significant decrease in rent is rather remarkable. I think this is the trend in a world of networks. And as we look at each of the regions, there's so many blank offices, so many partners, so many community centers, so many universities with extra space, that the trend shouldn't be having a zip code and security and big offices anywhere. It's about networking and building movements and being nimble and agile and being outside offices, doing service, not inside offices, doing all the sort of overhead. So again, rent has gone down, and we will also be role modeling that in other places like Buenos Aires, for example. I haven't had an office the whole time I've been at URI for the last 2.5 years. Neither has Karen Volker. So although we put it in original budgets, we saved it and used either conference rooms or coffee shops or other places with partners where we were able to meet rather nimbly, or at my home or Karen or Larissa's place to hold meetings. So having overhead is passé. Office buildings are largely empty after COVID in a lot of places. So being resourceful, that's one of our principles. So we challenge each and every one of the regions to look at their resourcefulness as well, so that we can devote most of our program granting to actual programming as opposed to overhead. So that's exciting. And then you'll see we'll break down some of the other items. So that gives you the total budget, again, at 3.28 million in terms of the expense side, with an ending balance of 318,000, allowing us to continue to pay back another $300,000 to the foundation. So this is great to have such partnership, and we expect to exceed these, be able to exceed our growth patterns and revenue and do even better. But the guidance was to be conservative, and that's what we are doing this year. So when we look at the regional expenses, just to show the breakout, you saw in 2023, the actuals were about $674,000 spent on the regions. It was broken out differently, so it's not an exact comparison. And then looking at projected in 2024, which we didn't quite meet, but looks like it will be about $989,000 going to the regional support work. In the coming year, the budget for 2025 has a total of $961,000. So nearly $1 million going to the regional staff contractors, stipends, and program grants, as you will see in the overall budget. And then the other item that is usually needs dissecting is just projecting what we have this year and what's in the budget for next year. The special consultants, that was an extra expense we had to work with Tom Hurley, as you recall, is an organizational consultant that was hired earlier in the year, working with us on mediation, again with Adar Cohen in New Hampshire, given some of the conflict and tensions and the ongoing need to understand the clarity of roles and responsibilities of trustees and staff and RLTs and our committees. So there's still growth to do and clarity to be had in 2025, but we feel like we've matured beyond the need for special consultants or mediators. So that's good news. Phew. As I mentioned, with Pamela's moving on as the Director of Finance and Admin, a fractional CFO, part-time as a contractor, has already been put in the budget at about $80,000, so plenty of support there. A finance consultant will just be continuing on helping Pamela for one more month with Robin. And then communication, media, and marketing consultants, we had about 68,000 total, including help with Circles of Light that was included there. And so we're marketing about 40,000, or including in the budget, excuse me, about 40,000. Grant writing with our institutional outreach, we're planning on a little uptick there with a part-time grant writer at 40,000. Given the sheer number of proposals we want to put out to foundations and the background research we require to have a successful proposal while doing all of our work. The sexual harassment training and DEI was included. Thank you for the new hire of Jennifer. So $8,850 is a deal for some of the better trainings that I hope most of you have already taken. You'll see the outreach for that. So we're proud of strengthening HR across URI among trustees as well as staff. And then we have a part-time major donor outreach. We want to be working with Bernstein.com and also growing our markets. So that will be about 50,000. Again, it saves us a lot of money to contract with consultants and audition them as opposed to jumping in and hiring them. So we want to see in the coming year more modular flexibility, you might call it, in contracting. So these professional services are broken down this way. It may be that some people are so valuable and do such spectacular work and want to work full time for URI one day that maybe by 2026, we may include them in our budgeting. But for the coming year, this is just contracting with professional services, including a junior accountant. The auditors are done every year. That should be a little bit less with some streamlining. And we have computer consultants. It's rather extensive, like helping to manage all of our work. They're called Box IT, but we've gotten their contract down. And then there's always website development, the server, security, and maintenance for all of that. We're getting the expenses down, but it's rather considerable. And then legal consultation and contingency planning, setting aside about $10,000 for that at any given year. So the total for professional contract services come to 364,000, and that is tightening the budget and the belts for the coming year while actually increasing some of our capacities. So this is a good deal for URI and for the budget as we've proposed it. So now for I guess the harder part was, what do we do, how to do phase transition and staff reorganization? Some of this had been in the works and planned for reorganization and restructuring, and I'll explain as we go through a draft org chart. But to how to note the transitions and honor the amazing devotion and time spent and dedication of several senior staff members who will be moving on in 2025 or by the end of this year. So let's take a look at what the budget actually has in it. Excuse me. So the $3 million plus budget for URI 3.0 required us to rethink the overall staffing of the organization. And I'll come back to this in a second, but I want to remind you what it looked like in the past couple of years. I inherited something that was different from this, but again, an untenable, not clear structure for the organization. If you look at me as executive director with 4 senior advisors reporting to me, plus an executive associate like Mary Dismore or formerly Emerson, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 senior directors, plus the board, GC members, 34, plus the SAC, plus the foundation that I represented, plus the USA and the European boards, among others. It's a rather enormous number of meetings and not streamlined, but it's what we inherited and what we moved on to create while we experimented over the last 2 years by introducing some expertise in Ruben Shank on learning and metrics and measurement, monitoring and evaluation, and also Karen Volker on the expertise in violence prevention. So this has turned out to be a good thing, But we knew and had already started to look at this summer ways that we could streamline and have integrated teams. If you think of Alice's position alone as director for global operations, even with coverage and help by Maria, all the, meeting with every single regional director and having one person reporting on each of them, doing the evaluations, mentoring each. Um, it was not evenly spread, shall we say. And so, although Alice did a Herculean job, once when I first started, she said, Jerry, sometimes it feels like I'm juggling china teacups or plates and trying to make sure none of them break. And it's a rather exhausting position. So we wanted to be able to spread that and come up with some new org structure or schema to show you with Alice's blessing and after significant discussion with all of the senior team. And setting back to this, this looks at what you're learning about change. So in the coming year, as you heard from the message from our chair, Eric Rue, that there will be big changes afoot. But I want to frame this as very positive, maybe even overdue in some cases. As we move to URI 3.0 and the strategies, there's some transition and succession planning underfoot. So, of course, we have Mary Dismore. She's doing a fantastic job as our executive team administrator, gluing much of the senior staff as well as the GC committees together. So in the coming year, she'll have a year under her belt and be even more valuable, even as she's taking on the very weighty role of helping to plan, coordinate the logistics for the face-to-face meeting. So that's stable. And we have Bill Swing, who has been our fearless founder and main, fundraiser over the years, as he's moving on to sort of right-size his portfolio and work 50% or half time in the coming year. Now he's passing on the reins of the SAC, for example, to Biff and Poulin. He will, over time, be between now and the Mexico meeting, be sort of stepping off the GC or executive committee responsibilities. And then myself, truth be told, you can't quite afford me. So I have loved URI, and I'm so proud of the work we've been doing together. But wink, wink, I also had my eye on Karen Volker when I hired her as someone with significant management experience and experience in diplomacy to be the first viable, tested and hard battled and auditioned executive director to start in the second quarter of next year. So the transition would be that I would phase out. We would set up Karen Volker for success, but this is under discussion, and this is an EC and GC responsibility. One of the most important responsibilities for the Global Council and the board is the hiring, firing, and review of your executive directors. So we are just very lucky to have someone trained and ready. She didn't look for this opportunity. She wasn't reaching for it, but all of the directors, and I think now the EC have interviewed and asked that she be willing to take on this responsibility as we move on. So what you'll notice is the three columns, the three main function areas for an organization. So this isn't all the lines in the square boxes that we see previously. It's getting a different feel of functionality. So of course you have to have strong finance and administration. So that's where Jennifer Balachow, with the new fractional CFO, will be stepping in, with Ida continuing on as a senior finance associate, and the vacancies, as I've mentioned, to hire an admin and accounting associate for HR and compliance, working with our contractors and committees. So that's obviously one of the three pillars of an organization. Moving to the right-hand column, development and communications. That's such a related aspect of revenue and visibility and marketing. So we, in addition to Pamela moving on in January, we have Diana Conan, after her 12 years of service, moving on in development and communications. And so who has been actually a star in terms of fundraising and outreach, working closely with me and Karen? It's been Larissa Bonza. And so we're looking at what is a new sort of rising generation of experienced, development and fundraising coordinators, and thinking about new pairings, as you'll see, like with Larissa and possibly Samira stepping up with her great communication skills, joining the global team. So we will do this in phases. This is not something that is just thrust upon us. It's for understanding and for phased transition with the objective, as I said earlier, the principle of stabilization and appreciation. So at the center of all we do, of course, is growth and impact. And with Alice's moving on at the end of January, we have Maria and Ruben, who did such amazing partnership work on the Porticus grant and looking at membership and everything we've learned all around the CC network in the world, that they will pair up to actually take over not the traditional map of operations that we saw previously, but actually taking over integrated teams with real strong support from the names you probably are already familiar with: Lauren, Sarah, Angie, Wanda, Layla, and Joan, also bringing in the voices and nuclear and human security issues. So violence prevention and learning in action and eco-healing, our URI strategic growth and impact. This is meat and potatoes and the muscles of our work, overseeing all the regions. So we'll be able to develop and discuss all our expanded integrated regional teams. So we plan on each region getting more coverage, even with less global staff, more coverage with the teamwork, not less, more responsibility and accountability, not less. So this is age appropriate for URI 3.0 with a lean $3 million budget starting in 2025. So again, coming soon in phases, but with a lot of discussion going on among the staff and with the EC and the leadership. So not everything is decided and not all the T's and I's are crossed, and there'll be some changes we'll discuss in the coming weeks and months en route to Mexico. So I've gone over that. Back to just the approach to the regional teams that I've mentioned, just so you get a feel. I couldn't have produced this graphic, but Diana did for me after talking with the teams, that instead of boxes, thinking more of our circles, and the early diagrams and graphics at the founding of URI showed almost like a cyclone of activity and rotations and circles and teams and multiple CCs as well as cooperation circles. So at the center, we always put our purpose: interfaith cooperation, violence prevention, and collective healing. So those represent like our main purpose areas, right? So enhanced regional teams. What does that mean? It means regional coordinators, that's obvious, and even the sub-regional ones are zonal coordinators, plus a lead representative on the team, not just Alice, but actually some of these other names will be taking lead staff roles. And then country liaison officers or advisors. Some people are moving on from paid positions to maybe staying involved as advisors and volunteers. We have our regional trustees and the RLTs. And then to have links back to development and communications so that we can have regional proposals and budgets with a finance and development representative allocated to each team. And then violence prevention, as you heard, the idea to have with Learning Impact regional hubs and capacities. So it's not just headquarters, the old model, or GSO. It's actually regional capacities for training in violence prevention and eco-healing and learning modules and impact. And then, of course, we're growing and regrowing the Senior Advisory Council, and we'll be having regional representatives that are showing up in different countries and regions who also can join the teams, as well as at-large trustees who may want to join. So we want to keep it simple, but we also want to know there are lead advisors as well as support teams looking at and helping out each of the regional program efforts. So stay tuned for learning more about these integral regional teams and enhanced coverage in 2025. Also something that won't be ironed out in January or February, but also will have started and can be discussed and notes compared and shared when you all gather in Mexico in the second half of April. So exciting stuff. We also want to make sure that the dignity and honoring, like not just appreciative inquiry, but deep appreciation for each of the people who have been contributing long term to the success and growth and joy of the URI family and network. So first up in December, we're seeing Sally Mahe. She'll be moving on. She has served as an invaluable senior advisor to me, tutoring me from my first day on the job, helping Diana with communications and keeping the stories. She's only been part-time, but invaluable, but that's added up. I mean, she was full-time for 28 years. Sally Mahe, the legend, has served this organization, and we want to honor her with her decision and moving on at the end of this month. And also congratulations on your new book, Sally. And then the CPAC coordinators, after the visit in May, these aren't lighthearted things, but we looked at job descriptions, we had meetings and had deep conversations with Maria Crespo, talking with Anne and Musa and Sodarat, ways that, are they really serving as regional coordinators? Are they ready for the growth of what we're planning for 2025? So they have sat on certain part-time positions. Anne, for example, in Australia, never expected to be still doing this part-time work for URI and Religions for Peace in Australia, but has been real faithful. And Musa is a legend in the work in Mindanao and elsewhere. And Sudarat, like his gifts in coordination and graphic design. So these people will be moving on and staying within the family. But as we restructure for some country priorities and youth outreach, CPAC is an area for experimentation and growth. And so none of these changes is actually sudden. They actually have come with weeks and months of conversations looking at what our priorities are for 2025. So again, I mentioned the change in the finance department with Pamela, Alice, not Alice, sorry, the finance department with Pamela and Robin. And Alice had given her notice, again, leaving things stronger than she found it. Her 8 years, remarkable work with us will be honored in January. Pamela's 14 years, as I mentioned, and Robin's pinch hitting for us in this past year has been invaluable. And then we get to me, hey, hold your tears, stop crying. February 28th, at the end of right after no, it's Valentine's Day. And I will be sort of moving on. And after only 2.5 years, but you've had so much change at URI. I think this is a good use of my talents in leadership coming in, trying to help lead the change as we got to URI 3.0. And as I say, moving on and staying in the friendship circle of URI. So really proud of what we've done together and happy to stay in close touch and actually more than confident that you're in good hands with Karen Volker and the team. And then lastly, Diana Conan, after 12 years of work, moving on as our Director of Development and Outreach. I couldn't have done, Diana plays so many roles. It's almost like a closet chief of staff and hit the ground running with me when I started as ED. So from fundraising to communication, Diana knows where all the dead bodies are and all the caskets and all the secrets of URI. So she's been invaluable, but she is finding time to move on as she moved to Mount Shasta. And so looking at new ways of doing real fundraising and major donor outreach outside the Bay Area, as well as new social media and decentralized and regionalized communication strategies as part of that URI 3.0 growth. So again, we can't thank these people enough. We will honor them with Zoom calls and celebrations online. So stay tuned for the calendar that will be forthcoming. Again, I'm sorry this has taken so long, just so many important changes. And lastly, thank you, all of you, as part of the wonderful GC community, the trustees, the new ones who are coming into change right away, the ones who have moved on and preceded us, and for all of you on the council going into the coming year of change. I think you should feel excited and proud as we launch the strategic framework for 2030 and also URI 3.0. So a lean, mean, growing machine And we are so happy to have been able to explain this. Again, apologies for such a long homework for you all to watch, either before the meeting or after, to get more flavor. We won't be able to cover all of this, of course, in the meeting, but I wanted to take some time to explain the conversations that have been going on at a senior level with myself and the staff, and what our strongest and best recommendations are. None of this is without a lot of footnotes and a lot of thinking, and our best, wisest recommendation for URI 3.0. So thank you, Eric, Rue, and the executive committee, like the countless hours and tireless work you've put through this transition, and all you newcomers who don't know what you're in for. But it's an exciting ride, and I'd close by saying it's an important ride. URI is needed more than ever in the world, with all of those changes and the increasing violence and religiously motivated violence showing up around the world. So let's not stop. Let's take a deep breath and let's approve this budget and roll up our sleeves and get ready for 2025. Thank you all.